Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name's Jasper. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for Rob and Greg for inviting us. I have got the job of just being a good hype man today. That's all I'm doing is saying hello and then passing it over to the big guns, David Kinnaman, okay? So basically, a little bit of the heart behind this, because I don't want to take up too much time. The heart of why we did this, I loved what Rob was saying. This is active listening, which is to the third degree. So we have spent a lot of money and a lot of time over the last year and a half to really listen to young people and young adults in Ireland. We have taken our time to do that. The posture of the whole project is that we want to know what young people are saying today in Ireland. We have lots of assumptions. We think as youth workers especially, we really know what they're thinking, but actually sometimes we don't even ask them. We have spent a lot of time gathering youth workers from across Ireland, forming questions and putting this out in one-on-one interviews, but also across the general public to find out what young people are saying today. So it is with great privilege and pleasure that we have this hot off the press, Finding Faith in Ireland. We want you to dig into it. The whole idea is that you take this and use it in your communities, in your churches, to actually look at some of the sobering findings, but also the hope that comes from this report that we play a part in shaping the next generation, and there is real confidence within the church that we can do that. So it is a pleasure to have David with us from Barna, all the way from California to present this. We have been around the country the last few days. This is our last stop on the tour, and it's a privilege to be here. So thank you very much. I am just going to hand over to David. The books are available today for €10 or 3 for €25. We'll be selling those in the tea breaks in different places. If you don't get them today, there are a lot more on the website, so I would encourage you to get them. People are buying books for their communities and lots of other books, so please do engage with that. We would love to see what comes out of it, that you discuss and plot the way forward with us.
Thanks, Jasper.
Thank you, bro. Bless you.
Well, good morning. Well, one more time. Good morning, guys. All right, great, thanks. So we want to talk about what's happening in the research, and I'm sort of the token geek. I'm a geek for Christ's sake. All right, so what I do for a living is to interview people. For 22 years, I've been working at Barna Group, listening to people. We've done more than 1 million interviews in North America, and this is one of our beginning studies outside the U.S. to look really at the perspectives of this next generation. We're going to be talking about finding faith with 14 to 25-year-olds, teenagers and young adults. And what we want to talk about to begin is the fact that this generation is in a very different context than any other sort of generation before. See, human nature doesn't change, God's nature doesn't change, but the culture changes, the context changes. And so one of those things is that we're living in the screen age, aren't we? We're living in a very different kind of context because the tools are shifting. You can see here behind me a little infographic with no data at all, but this just gives you one little picture of how sort of the world is changing and ministry is changing, authority structures are changing. And so we think this is a really important sort of shift that is changing the way institutions, the way people interact with religion, with content, all sorts of things sort of embodied in this shift. And one of the ways that I would ask you to consider what this means for the church and for Christians is that we are shifting from a culture that has largely been sort of Jerusalem-like to what I call digital Babylon. All right, so this is just a concept that we use to try to help you understand some of the sort of the contextual shifts that have taken place for this next generation. So in Jerusalem, in a Jerusalem-like context, it's a slower pace. There's a monotheistic type culture. Faith is at the center. There's a sacred view of reality that permeates a society. The idol of those kind of contexts, because after all, human beings make idols in any context that they're placed in, right? So even if it's a very God-fearing context, we come up with a way to have idols. There's a false piety in those places, right? There's a sense of trust and control and authority structures. But in Babylon, in an accelerated, frenetic world, everything is different. There is the sense that faith is at the margins, that it's religiously plural or secularly oriented. Sacred is but one view of reality, and the idol is fitting in and being up to speed. There's a sort of a bittersweet tension between sort of where we are as people of faith and society in general. I can sort of illustrate this story. My middle daughter, Annika, a few years ago, she was going to a sort of a Christian school camp, and on the school bus up to the camp, my daughter Ani and her friend Callie start singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall. And Mrs. Vargas says, "Ani, beer?" And my sweet daughter, Annika, says, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vargas, is it supposed to be wine?" Right? See, this is the illustration of, in a culture of Jerusalem, like, no, we sort of follow the rules. We don't sing about mixed drinks on the Christian school bus. But you know, in digital Babylon, it's sort of like, we don't even, well, what sort of mixed drinks are we supposed to sing about? All right, so this is just the context that we're observing based on our work at Barna, that we're ministering in a new kind of world. And so with that context, systems of authority, can we trust Scripture? You know, how do we deal with doubt? How do we deal with sort of these various vocations that young people are being called into? And so with that, let's talk about some of the research that we had done in this Finding Faith in Ireland. We had done more than 1,000 interviews among youth workers, among students. And when we look at the perspectives of youth workers towards today's students, we asked them, what are some of the ways that you would describe today's young people? And this is the perspective of youth workers here in the Republic of Ireland. And you can see that there's sort of positive perspectives, neutral perspectives, negative perspectives. Many of the words and phrases that even youth workers are using sort of tend to be sort of negative in nature. They understand the tension that young people are actually facing. Anxious and pressured, lost, apathetic and bored, image conscious. You can see so many of these attitudes that youth workers, they're sort of the Geiger counters. They're the ones who are sort of in the middle of it. They're in the midst of understanding and feeling the pressures that these young people are facing. Positive phrases are passionate, searching, gifted, campaigners for social justice, open to ideas, hopeful, creative. So this is just a perspective that young youth workers told us about. And then to sort of dive into the quantitative research that we had done, we did both qualitative and quantitative for the study. Again, all this is included in the report. But what we find is that the majority of young people in Ireland are still Christian, right? So 70%, when we ask them, what is your religious faith? 70% say Christian. But what we find is that they're very much Christian in name only for the most part. When we compare them to other contexts here in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland, you can see that there's a sort of 13% of young 18 to 25-year-olds. We're just looking at young adults on this slide. 13% are what we call practicing Christians. That means that they've gone to a religious service at least once in the last month. They consider their faith to be very important in their life. They identify as Christian, and it's pretty similar to the percentage of practicing Christians among young adults in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, as well as in England. But you can see one of the big differences here in the Republic of Ireland is there's even more general Christian commitment. So what we want to do next is take a look at some of the different kind of perspectives that young people have. Part of what our research tries to do is sort of fill out a more sort of multi-dimensional understanding of faith. So we're not simply asking about religious identity and behavior, but we also want to ask a little about what they believe. What are their theological points of view? And even more to the point, what do they think of Jesus? And so with this data, we gave people basically 4 or 5 different options. The slide, I'm going to show you 2 different slides. The first is he was a normal human being, but not God or a prophet. And you can see that roughly the same number of young adults in the Republic of Ireland believe that, about 1 in 5, as is true across the water. You can see he was God in human form who lived among people in the 21st century, and 1/4 of young adults believe that here in the Republic of Ireland, compared to just 16% in the UK. Next slide. He is a prophet of God or a spiritual person, but not God. He is a mythical or fictional character. And then don't know. Look at the fact that young people here in the Republic of Ireland are actually double the proportion of those in the UK who just say, you know what, they couldn't even pick one of the options that we gave them, right? I mean, that's a pretty telling, kind of thing about the fact that they just don't even know. They don't even have a context, a place to put it. Okay, so what we also look at is their perceptions of Christianity. And if Christianity is a brand, what sort of brand does Christianity have? What are the ways that young people today think about what it means to be Christian? What are the perceptions of present-day Christianity? And this slide shows you a little bit about that. So this shows you just the perspectives of young non-Christians. The negative perceptions are on the left, being anti-science, being judgmental, out of touch, anti-homosexual, overconfident, fearful, boring, sexist, racist, fake, isolated. What's interesting to me, we've done a lot of work like this in the States. These are actually not as negative as we found in the States. And part of this, friends, I think is because they're just sort of, it's even more irrelevant here. right? When people have a negative reaction, there's actually something you can do with that. But here in Ireland, what we're finding is they're not even as negative as in some contexts. They just don't even think about it. They have an impregnable fortress of indifference to Christianity. So they also have some positive perspectives. These are young non-Christians, remember. They're loving towards others. They believe that Christians are loving towards other Christians at 27%. Look, but they're less likely to believe they're loving towards everyone, right? Are they good for Ireland? Are they good for the world? Do they care about social justice? Are they kind? Are they wise? Are they spiritually vibrant? Look, the most common perception is that they're elderly at 34%. I love that. All right. So now we can look at the perspectives of young Christians, young practicing Christians. This is that percentage of young people, about 1 in every 8 young people qualify as a practicing Christian. And you can see some of the perspectives that they have. Obviously, the positive perspectives are growing. Loving towards other Christians, loving towards everyone, good for the world, good for Ireland. What are ways that we might take our experiences and try to help instill in this new generation a more clear sense of the good that Christianity does in them and through them? Right? Could we see some of these percentages grow? Could a place like Rubicon become a place where we are nurturing a more whole response to what it is that young Christians are asking of us? But I think it's also important to realize that young people, even young practicing Christians, have some negative perceptions. These are smaller percentages, but they still represent tens of thousands of young people who are very committed to Christianity, but are feeling some of those tensions. They're feeling as though they don't know how to essentially represent what it means to be Christian. Let's just go back and forth between those so you can kind of sort of see the differences. Again, here's the perspectives of young non-Christians, and then here are the perspectives of young Christians. And you can see sort of the fact that there are more positive perspectives, but even 36% of young Christians say elderly. Now, again, here's the thing. One of the cool things from this study is we found a lot of reasons for you all, for those in this Republic of Ireland context, to be concerned. I mean, there's lots of challenging realities. The data has this way of sort of smacking us in the forehead and saying, what are we going to do with this? And at the same time, I want to encourage you, there were lots of really hopeful things that we discovered. Really cool things. Like when we interviewed these practicing Christians and we asked them, do you want to find a way that Jesus could connect to the world that you live in? And 71% of these young practicing Christians say that is absolutely the case. They say they want to change the priorities of the church to reflect more closely what Jesus intended for it. And so there's this really cool sort of finding, this sort of bubbling up of hope and the sense that young Christians, even though they represent a sort of a small minority of the next generation of teens and young adults, they're asking for deeper answers. They want their faith to matter in the world. And even among those who sort of have maybe the muscle memory of Christianity, those who say they're Christian but aren't very active, to me, this when I look at this data, I see all of these great opportunities because they're sort of saying, well, tell me more, help me understand how this might connect. There is still this edge of wondering and asking the church to respond in a healthy and positive way. One of the cool things from this study was the fact that young people in Ireland are very much interested in unity. And they're very interested in how it is that the church, the divides between the Catholic community and the non-Catholic Christian community could be bridged. Let me just show you a little bit of that data. We asked 3 different questions about that. There's too much tension between the Catholic Church and other churches. 1 in every 5 young people, young Catholics and young non-Catholic Christians, said that they agreed strongly with that statement. A majority agreed either strongly or somewhat with that statement. Almost a majority said they would be happy to go to a Christian event that was for both Catholics and non-Catholics. A majority believe that no matter what church a person goes to, he or she can be a good Christian. So there's this real drive we saw in the research that young people are sort of past some of the age-old questions of division that have characterized faith in this context. We also find that 1 in 4 young people admits to us that they're going through a period of spiritual doubt, and an even greater percentage, at 40%, say they have gone through that in the past. What's interesting to us in looking at this is that those who are going through a question of spiritual doubt are actually no more likely to drop out of church. And so one of the things that we conclude, you can read more about it in the report, is that doubt actually propels people in their faith. It actually helps to build more resilient faith. It doesn't necessarily mean people are going to lose their faith when it comes to doubt. There were at least two different areas where we found real remarkable changes, remarkable sort of drivers, not necessarily causal, but we found some interesting relationships in the data. Let me just show you those two. One was about Christian events. So young people who have attended a Christian event of some sort, it wasn't a very high percentage of young people who have done that, but when they do, it seems to sort of tell us something very interesting about the trajectory of their spiritual engagement. So taking communion, praying on my own, praying with others, giving money to the church, going to confession, volunteering, telling others about Jesus, praying the rosary, attending some type of Christian study or group, reading the Bible on my own, attending a Bible study. All of these were sort of much higher among those who had attended some sort of Christian event. And similarly, those who said that they had a spiritual mentor or a guide were much more likely to have some of those sort of positive forms of engagement with their faith. So this is just one way we might look at some of the triggers that could help us in making a difference with this next generation. So just to sort of zoom out, we all have our sort of experiences in a particular context. For me, being in California, being in a world that's sort of different. I've worked with youth in our church, and sort of I've got my own anecdotal experiences. But this data helps us sort of zoom out and understand a little bit more what's happening here in the Republic of Ireland. And I would say, after having spent about a decade of my life really looking at this next generation, I'm 43, I'm very passionate about the church awakening to the questions and issues that this next generation is asking of it. That I believe, like with my whole heart, that this is a generation that is living in a very different kind of context, and that we are so busy trying to sort of defend our traditions and our ideas that we just really haven't done the work of understanding how to prepare them for life on mission in this new sort of exile. And so let me just suggest to you 5 things that we're learning in this research. These aren't sort of quick fix formulas for sort of spiritual discipleship, but the things that we're learning about ways that we can make a difference with this next generation. And those include meaningful relationships, helping people develop true and sort of supportive relationships in the context of their faith. The second is cultural discernment. How do we understand Scripture so that we can live more effectively in our time? For example, how does the book of Ecclesiastes help an ambitious generation understand that all is vanity, right? That's a good example of what cultural discernment might look like. Reverse mentoring. The very fact that we're trying to listen in on this new generation through this report is the sense of like, how could this generation speak to us? How could they help us learn what it means to be faithful? The notion of being in exile, the very idea of being in exile is that Daniel, for example, he's the pathway forward for faith. It's not incidental, it is instrumental to the way that God is up to his work in the world. And that's the idea of reverse mentoring. Vocational discipleship. How can we prepare young people for lives on mission in the careers that they have in science and in entrepreneurial kinds of careers and creative industries? How is it that we can help them understand God's design for those places? And finally, a firsthand experience of Jesus. How is it that when we experience what the life of Jesus and the life of the Spirit in our world, what is it that changes us? Most important, right? Like, these are all just good things to do. They're sort of what any kind of social movement might try to do, but we're not just a group of people who are part of a club. We're part of Jesus own people, and that changes the way we interact with the world. So these are some ideas that we've been working on at our company, some insights that we're gaining from the data. We just showed you, go back to that slide about the mentoring. You see sort of the mentoring role, the importance of meaningful relationships and doing cultural discernment together, and all sorts of things that are happening under the surface when we see these kinds of relationships. And click back to that last slide there. All of these sort of shifts should change the way we think about the very work we're doing. And I'm not just approaching this as sort of a research scientist, as a social scientist. I also approach this as a dad. I have 3 kids. My oldest, Emily, is at UC Berkeley in California. It's got a reputation in the States as being quite a liberal place. She's majoring in molecular and cell biology. I'm so proud of her. She's such a cool kid, and a geek, just like her mom. I guess a little bit like me too. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about as a dad is, okay, what do I, I don't just need you to go to church, Emily. Like, how is it that I could help you in your new context up in San Francisco sort of have these kinds of things in your life, in and around, what is happening for you as you do your studies, as you become the young woman that God has called you to be? What might it look like for you to pursue faith and faithfulness in that context? So that's how it's changing me as a dad. I'm asking myself those kinds of questions as a dad with Emily and with Annika and with my son, Zach. So those are the things that we're learning here from this Finding Faith in Ireland. It is such a great privilege to share this information with you, to realize that God is at work here, that even though there are places that are really discouraging and do sort of hit us hard when it comes to the reality on the ground with these youth and young adults, could we have compassion on them? Could we see like how hard it is to grow up in this screen age with sort of all the things that are happening in and through media and content and sex and sexuality? Could we use this research as a way of saying, like, Lord, would you lead us to a place of humbly serving and learning and leading with these young people who God has called to himself? So thank you very much for your time and attention this morning. Thanks for having us. And we look forward to seeing what you guys think of this research.